Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we are going to be discussing Disclosing Sexual Assault with our special guest, Hazel Katherine Larkin. So thank you for joining us today, Hazel.
You know, it's a pleasure to be here. It really is. And I know that probably sounds an odd thing to say when we're talking about something as serious as sexual violence. But the reason I say it is because, well, first of all, you're both lovely people and it's fun to hang out with you.
Thank you.
But also because the fact that we're having this conversation means this conversation is being had. And that for me brings me joy, because for so long, sexual violence has been hidden away. It's kind of the dirty secret of all the dirty secrets, the dirtiest of all the secrets. And we still speak in euphemistic language when we talk about sexual violence, particularly child sexual abuse. So that's why I'm saying it's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, well, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. And before we jump into this discussion, just to show our audience how awesome you are, would you like to introduce yourself quickly to our audience?
I'm not sure awesome is a word I would use. Funny, my LinkedIn bio says that I'm a professional nosy parker. Because I'm a sociologist by training, and that means that I'm allowed to ask questions of people, and I do, and I call it being a sociologist rather than being an interrogator or just an average nosy person. But I'm originally from Ireland, which you can probably tell from my accent, but I have lived in a number of different places. I've called about 8 different countries home across 2.5 continents, and I'm currently in Portugal. Don't feel too sorry for me. But my background is, well, my first love is theatre, because I think we're all about our stories. So that was my first qualification, my first professional area, if you like. And then I returned to education and completed a BA in psychology and sociology. And then I did a master's degree in sexuality studies. And then I followed that up with a law degree in international human rights law at Queen's University in Belfast. And then I went back and did my PhD in, it was an autoethnographic study, which basically means that I got to be a nosy parker with other people who've been through similar experiences. So my research was conducted with women who had histories of child sexual abuse and whose mothers also had histories of child sexual abuse. So that's the academic thing. And now I get to say that I'm literally writing the book on it, because my book that's based on my thesis is called Intergenerational Trauma and Child Sexual Violence in Ireland, and it's going to be published by Routledge later this year. And then professionally, I work with people who have histories of child sexual abuse and the people who support them professionally and personally. So if you are the parent of somebody or the spouse of somebody who has a history of sexual violence, I can work with you. I do a lot of work, obviously, with people, and it's mainly women who have histories of sexual violence also. And also with women who have narcissistic mothers, because my own primary research has found quite an overlap in that area. So yeah, that's who I am. That's what I do. And I'm a mum. I mean, that's the most important job I've ever had. I have 2 incredible daughters.
So just in case anyone in our audience was wondering, you have a wealth of knowledge coming at you today. That is a lot of education, a lot of degrees, a lot of letters behind your name, I'm assuming, in the official standpoint. But we are so excited to be able to share this with you today.
I always love when we have guests who have way more important credentials than you and I, Amanda.
Yes.
Wow. I don't know. I think a lot of what's important is compassion and understanding and intellectual curiosity. And you don't have to have a degree to
Yes.
to have intellectual curiosity and to want to know about things and to want to be an iterative learner, where you know that you can have a position on something, and then that's been your position all your life on whatever it might be, and then suddenly new information comes at you and you change your position, and that doesn't mean that you're backing down. It means you're actually moving forward, because you're becoming more, your position is more informed, so you're actually moving forward as a human being. So I don't think you need to go to college for that at all. You just have to have a bit of brain and want to use it. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's just I like to
I
read,
only-
so you know.
And I like playing video games, so there's the real
There we
problem.
go.
I'm just too poor to keep going to college. So
Oh, you know,
Also real.
that is a total bugbear of mine as well. I think that just gatekeeps. I know, sorry, we're getting off topic here slightly, but
It's all
but not
right.
really, because we are here to talk about education, how, you know, how to be educated about disclosure. But I think that gatekeeping around education is just so wrong. It's like education is only for people who can afford it. And I just happen to be very fortunate that I'm European, and a lot of our degrees are free, right up to PhD level in certain countries, and in other countries there's heavy subsidies for people who, like me, were just too poor to pay for their degrees in the first place. And but it's shocking. It should be like that for everybody. And it's having said that, the internet, which I know, again, there is this is a parallel, not really a tangent, because we do condemn the internet, and we're very, very aware of how dangerous a tool it can be in the wrong hands, or in the hands of somebody who wants to be malicious or to abuse children. But at the same time, there's a lot of really good information online as well. And there are some places that even offer courses online that are free, that are useful. So there is, on the one hand, yes, we can condemn the internet as being a terrible place where children and others can be harmed, but it's also a place where children and others can find information and solace, and that feeling of I'm not alone when it comes to issues like abuse, and also how to finding where we can get help. And I do say we, because I am a survivor of child sexual abuse myself.
Yeah, it's, when used well, the internet and social media is a great tool to gain community and to find other people who are similar to you, and especially if that's not something you have in your everyday life.
And actually, that's what we learned from the Me Too movement. And that was the impetus for a lot of people to disclose and to make disclosures, because it was like, oh, I'm not the only one. Because that can often be part of the problem when you have people who are intent on abusing children or others, that the grooming process is so complete by the time somebody is abused, that you're not necessarily, as the person being abused, you're not necessarily aware of where the boundaries are, because the person who starts to abuse you doesn't go into you the first time that they abuse you. It's not necessarily going to be a rape straight away. That's more unusual. What's more usual is a sense of shared complicity, if you like, particularly for a child, that if you have somebody who comes to them and says, and tells them like a dirty joke and laughs, and then they have a little secret. Oh, don't tell anybody that I told you that joke, because that's really for grown-ups. That's how easily and how simply grooming can start, and then it progresses.
Yeah, we've mentioned it in a few different podcasts when we're talking about like safety, especially safety with kids, is that like we don't keep secrets. Like don't tell your kid like they need to keep a secret and stuff. Like a surprise is fine, because a surprise eventually the person finds out. Like that's the whole point of a surprise.
Yeah.
But a secret is intended to be kept, and we don't want kids keeping secrets, because if they learn to do that, they're being set up to then potentially withhold harmful information
Yeah.
or harmful experiences they've had because they've been told it's a secret and they can't tell anybody else.
That's exactly it. Yes. And that's part of the way in which society can collude almost with abusers, because we still view sex and sexuality as taboo subjects. So we're not giving our children the language around sex and sexuality, and we're not giving them the sense that it's not just normal and acceptable, but it's healthy. You know, to have a good relationship with your own body is a really healthy way to be. But we don't really think about that in terms of our children, because you know, if we even look at the language that we use for and around and about children, we talk about the innocence of childhood, and we all think we know what we mean by that, but what do we really mean by that? You know, when we talk, are we talking about how when a child is born they don't know anything? Well, you know, they've got their instincts and they've got their reflexes, but what else do they have? They have what we teach them for the most part. And the onus is on us then as adults and parents to teach them the words for the bodies that they live in. I mean, the amount of times that you think of parents who will quite happily do, you know, head and shoulders, knees and toes, and where's your eyes and where's your nose? But my goodness me, let's just not mention the fact that you might have a vulva or a penis, because well, I've heard people say to me, because I will bring this up when I'm working with adults, with parents, and say, well, what words do you give your children for their body parts? And sometimes people say, oh, well, I don't use those words because I don't like them. I think they just sound a bit daft. And I go, yeah, but you know what I think sounds daft? Elbow. If ever there was a daft word, I think it's elbow. My elbow. I mean, of course it is. That's where your funny bone is. It's in your elbow. I mean, you know, how more ridiculous can anything be? Whereas a vulva, a vagina, a penis, you know, an anus, a scrotum, these don't sound nearly as daft, if you ask me. So it sounds more like people are using words and parents are using words, and we're kind of taught that we need to be a little bit more discreet and polite and genteel about certain parts of the body, which automatically signals to the child that we don't talk about those things. We don't talk about those parts of the body. So therefore, please don't come to me and talk about that part of your body.
Right. Even just using the term private parts.
I know.
Like, which is a better term than most of what we use in America. Americans are very heavy on the euphemism for these things. I'm sure it's the same way in Europe as well, but in America, people will call your private body parts literally anything else in the world besides their name.
And you see, the problem with that then can be that if a child does try to explain to an adult that something has happened to them, if you say, well, uncle, whoever touched my smile, you go, well, that's great. He obviously thinks you have a very pretty smile. Oh, okay. Then we move on, you know, or gosh, yes, the euphemisms, you know, there's a saying in Ireland, whatever you say nothing when you talk about you know what. It's like, oh, that's as clear as day, isn't it? Yes. You know, so we probably taught you how to use euphemistic language. But it can then be problematic, because if we don't give children the right words for their bodies or the right words for what is happening to them, how can we then expect them to use language to tell us what is going on for them?
Right. And then this was, I think, one of the conversations we wanted to have too, was then you miss that disclosure because you don't know the right questions to ask. You think that, oh, they're talking about, this is a popular one that went through America for a while, like calling it a cookie. And, you know, so a kid's talking about a cookie and how, you know, family member XYZ touched their cookie. Okay, well, you know, whatever, germs, I guess, blah, blah, blah. Nobody takes a second glance at it. So how can that child really disclose something if they don't have the language to disclose it? And even then, taking that a step further into an adulthood, you're not comfortable with that disclosure because you've been taught your entire life that that's not something you talk about.
That's very true. And also we find that societies tend to victim blame, and that prevents disclosure as well, even when we do have the language to wrap around our experiences. And even the language around, apart altogether from victim blaming, even using language like an underage woman. Well, an underage woman is a child, okay? That's a girl. Let's just be correct about that.
Yeah, there's no such thing as an underage woman.
Yes, or having underage sex, or sex with an underage woman. Yeah, we call that rape. That's what that actually is. And of course, there's been a lot of these kind of conversations in media recently, and I cringe every time, and you probably do too, every time we hear these euphemistic phrases being used, or these kind of truth adjacent terms being used, when when the real thing, call it what it is. And then I've heard the argument, yes, but then your children will hear it. Yes, then your children will hear it, and then you explain. The same way, if your child says to you, where do babies come from, you explain to them in age appropriate language, because if they're asking the question, they want the answer, so give it to them. Again, it comes back to gatekeeping knowledge. No, if somebody asks a question, give them the answer.
But it's also like, on the flip side of this too, like, who does teaching kids the non-correct terms, or not using the correct terms with kids, and who does that protect? Who does that help? Who does that protect? Well, who is that actually helping?
It's not protecting the kids.
It's not protecting the kids, but it means that old people like me, it spares our blushes, and it means that we don't have to go, oh my goodness me, if somebody says a word in public or around us that we have been taught to be uncomfortable with. And if you're uncomfortable with the word, then you're obviously going to be uncomfortable with the part of the body that it's associated with.
Yeah.
And
it also protects the people doing harm.
Of course it does. Yes, it does. Yes. And it also protects the people to whom disclosure may be made from having to deal with the disclosure.
Yeah.
Right.
You're not going to tell
you look
me.
at all these talks, like, right now in our media is very big. The underage women, these terms are being put forth by the people who are protecting these perpetrators.
Yes.
Because the victim's not going to say, when I was an underage woman, somebody had sex with me against my will. No, they're going to say, when I was a child, someone raped me.
Yeah.
All these polite terms, all of these euphemisms and things, that's a defense mechanism for the perpetrator and for the people protecting the perpetrator. So remember that when you hear things like that.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Amanda, is that you've just said something there that's really pertinent, that a victim or a survivor will say, when I was a child, I was raped. Now, it's sometimes we don't, because rape is still the most awful thing that can happen. And sometimes people don't want to admit that even to themselves. So they may say, well, I was assaulted or I was touched. And that's the thing that I would always say, that the first and the most important disclosure we ever make is the disclosure we make to ourselves as victims, because that changes how we view ourselves. It changes our internal landscape, if you like. And when we reveal that to ourselves, because I suppose I should have started at the beginning, really, and explained what I mean by disclosure, which is, when I talk about disclosure, particularly with respect to children who have histories of child abuse, or to adults who have histories of child abuse, it's the revelation, whether it's spoken or unspoken, that the abuse has taken place. And before we tell anybody else, we have to accept that for ourselves. But that's using language. There are other ways that children in particular will disclose because they don't have the language to put on abuse, whether that's because they don't have because they're too young, and we forget, or we aren't even aware sometimes that children can be abused before they even have words. The pre-verbal child can also be sexually abused.
Yeah.
And that means that that is their normal, because I know that in schools and in community centers and in other institutions where children gather, that adults who take the in some countries it's called children first, or the child protection, children who adults who are responsible for child protection will often be told to watch out for a change in behavior. A child who used to be happy-go-lucky that suddenly isn't, or that appears withdrawn. And I say, yes, absolutely. But not always, because sometimes a child has only ever known abuse. So there will be no change in their behavior. You're not going to have a child who's outgoing and gregarious who's suddenly withdrawn. And also you may have a child who's being abused on a regular basis who isn't necessarily withdrawn because they're in school or they're at an after school activity, and that's their fun and happy place, and that's where they can forget about the abuse, for want of a better way of putting it. And sometimes, and I've worked with many women myself who have no cognitive memory of their actual abuse, but their body discloses. And oftentimes women, and I do say women because predominantly women and girls are more likely to be victims than boys and men. And that's part of the problem actually with child sexual abuse, is that we don't know how big the problem is, because we don't even have a global working accepted definition. Different territories, different jurisdictions will have different definitions of what we're even talking about. So even to collate statistics can be difficult. And like that, statistics generally come post-disclosure.
Yeah.
So
that also requires them to disclose to get the statistic.
Exactly.
And if we know most victims will never disclose, no matter what data we're using, we're always using underreported data.
Yeah, always.
And I'm going to just say too, like a lot of the how do I want to say it? Like the ideas we have about that withdrawn child, or about that, child that's acting out now. At least in America, studies have only been performed on males for as long as studies have been being performed. Things look different in somebody who's raised as a female than they do as a male. The same thing happened with people being diagnosed with ADHD or autism. They present differently, right? So you may have this thought in your head that a child's going to start acting out because things are going wrong. But what about that child who is now more of a people pleaser than they even were before? They're acting like the perfect little angel because they don't want to upset the flow. And people don't look at those kids because they're like, no, they're just well behaved. They're doing great.
That's it.
But sometimes that's that trauma response as well, and we're completely ignoring it.
Yeah, we're missing it entirely because, as you've said, Amanda, girls are socialized differently. It's not okay. It's not okay for anybody to, I don't know, start throwing tables across a room, but we are quicker to try to understand why a boy might be doing that than why a girl might be doing that. The girl will be ascribed the label difficult, or
hysteria.
Oh yeah, there we are. Quicker than a boy. We're more likely to investigate why is that happening, or say, oh, he's got so much energy, he needs to go out and run around, and that may not be the best response for the boy either. So I suppose we're talking about what we're missing, and maybe a clue around what we might need to be looking for around young people, children who disclose. Even if they don't have the words, watching how children play and how they interact with other children can sometimes be a clue. And I need to preface this by saying that one item or one issue alone doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's being abused, but a number of them together may, or just one on its own might just get your spidey senses tingling slightly and put this child on your radar for, just a little bit of extra attention. in the most positive way. And sometimes it's drawings. And it doesn't even need to be explicit drawings, because I've made that mistake before, and I've been in training and I've said drawings, and people automatically assume that I mean sexually explicit drawings, and I don't. Sometimes a child will draw a picture with the perpetrator conspicuously absent. Because we need to remember that, unfortunately, most of the child sexual abuse that we are aware of takes place within the family.
Yep.
We like to outsource that in terms of, we like to tell ourselves it's the church, it's school, it's somewhere else, it's somebody else. But unfortunately, most sexual abuse takes place within the home. So if you have a child and, for example, you say to your 5 or 6 year old class, please draw a picture of your family. You've got, that's what we're doing in art today. And that you are presented with a picture of the family, but one person is missing. You might think, where is that person? Now, it could be that, oh, well, that was the day that we went to the zoo and they weren't there because they were at work. Okay, fine, that's interesting. But if you notice that there is somebody who's consistently missing, and sometimes it's the child themselves, that they don't even see themselves as part of the family. So they won't represent themselves in their own drawing. Or it may be that whenever they draw themselves, they scribble on their own face, or maybe they scribble on the face of the perpetrator. Not usually, though, because they have been told, they have been groomed to believe that they're the problematic one. So very often that is how they will view themselves. And that may come across then in their drawings. They may draw themselves as smaller by a long way than anybody else in the picture, even than their pet kitten or the youngest child in the family, if it's not them. It's very subtle, and that's part of what makes it difficult to spot. But it can also be, again, with a young child, how they play. I mean, there's this very obvious. Sorry?
So, right, really quick, I want to make a point in here to connect two things for people.
Sure.
Because you bring up how they've been told by the person grooming them that they're the problem,
mm-hmm.
they're the problematic one.
Yes.
Well, how do trauma responses often present in people when they're in public? Children may also present as being a potential problem child in class. So if they're hearing then from teachers, from school staff, that they're a problem child,
mm-hmm.
and they're hearing from the person who has groomed them that they're the problem, this message is being reinforced then by the society around them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And you have the child who believes then that they're evil, that there's something wrong with them, that they are the person who has forced their perpetrator. It's almost like in domestic violence situations, in intimate partner situations, where it's, now look what you made me do. So it is that, again, that victim blaming, but the child has no other point of reference. So they believe what they're told by the adults in their lives, because the adults are the people who are in charge, with the authority, with the knowledge, and we believe them. And also because as children, we rely on these adults for our safety, our shelter, our food, so we believe what they say because it's a survival mechanism, for children in abusive situations. It's like, well, what is my choice here? Say nothing, hope that I get through this alive, and if I do, then maybe I'll be able to fix myself, or maybe I won't get through it alive, and maybe that'll be even better. Because we can't ignore the fact that very young people, very young children, can have suicidal thoughts also, and have a desire for suicide, because or even just for death. Just hope that I don't wake up in the morning, because that'd be great, because this is a problem that's bigger than I am, and my pain is bigger than I am. So where does it go, and what do I do with it? Can it please go away?
I think that's something that we need to kind of touch on too, because yes, there are children with the knowledge of in the language of suicide, but I think more often than not, it comes across as that, well, I don't care if I live anymore. I don't care if I'm not part of the family anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care, blah, 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 blah. And, again, with that, we tend to lump that into, this child is, being a problem child. They don't care about their family. They don't care about being a part of this life. Why don't they care about being a part of this life anymore?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And very often it's not that it's about wanting pain to go away. It's about wanting the situation you're in to be different to what it is. And altogether, aside from drawings and what they will represent by pictures, sometimes just watching how a kid plays. Do they interact with other children? If they're playing mummies and daddies, or if they're playing house, how do they play that? How do they suggest the roles might be for these people? Or even there's an example that I will never forget of a child who would play with Lego. This child was like 5.5. And when playtime came around in their primary school, the Lego would come out, and this child only ever wanted the black blocks, and would go and would trade the black blocks. If they had a handful of Lego, they'd trade their yellows and their blues and their greens and their reds for black Lego pieces, and then would sit down and very happily build walls. And that's all this child ever did with the Lego. Now, I don't think you have to have any specialist knowledge to think that that's just a bit odd, when the beauty of Lego is that it can do so much, and anything can be anything with a bit of imagination. And all this child did was build walls, and nobody ever questioned it.
And that's not something that child is consciously like, I'm going to build walls with these, because no, this is just something that's happening subconsciously. They're building that wall to keep themselves separate, to keep themselves protected, and it's definitely happening on a subconscious level.
Yeah.
And it's our job as adults to look at that, to read that.
Exactly. Yes. And then as children get older, and there are things as well with younger children, who don't necessarily have the language. Things like if you have a child who's often touching their own genitals, that can be because they're uncomfortable. Now, look, sometimes it could be they've had a growth spurt and their knickers are just too small. It doesn't automatically mean that somebody is harming them sexually, but it can. So, to have that awareness, it could be because they have been on some level they don't see that there's anything wrong or private about what we were calling their private parts, so that touching their own genitals in a situation where there are other people around doesn't feel like something they shouldn't do, because that's what happens to them anyway. When they go home, somebody's there to touch their genitals, and not necessarily saying they're being very exhibitionist, but just that the hand might be between the legs and the child isn't even consciously doing it or doing it to shock. They're just doing it maybe because they're a little bit bored and kind of thinking, well, I know this feels good when I do it, so I'll just do this, but more frequently and more often, and for a longer period than a child who is maybe 2, 3 and exploring their genitals and kind of go, oh, this feels good, I'll do this again. There we are. That's another taboo. We don't like to admit that our children are sexual beings and that their genitals will give them pleasure. We don't know how to deal with that as adults. We tell them it's bad and it's wrong and it's dirty, instead of saying, that's quite lovely and quite normal, but it's private, and go wash your hands. So it can be things like that. And then as children get older, the language that they use when they're with their peers, in terms of just maybe knowing a little bit more than you would expect them to, or having, telling jokes that are a little bit too sexually advanced for where you would expect them to be. I mean, all kids laugh at sex because, there's some way they laugh at fart jokes, and, it's funny, and somebody goes bum, and oh my goodness, that's hilarious, because we all know that, bums are a bit private and you shouldn't say that, or, but it's a little bit more than that. It's the child who seems to have too much knowledge. I'm thinking of a child who at the age of 10, they were doing in history class, learning about Henry VIII and his multiple wives. And while half the class or most of the class was scandalized that, oh my goodness, imagine having more than one wife. And this was in Holy Catholic Ireland at the time, so we're long before divorce came into legislation, which only happened in 1996. But anyway, and this child, rather than be horrified, said, oh my goodness, he must have had a very big bed. And you think, well, why is that automatically where that child's thought goes? And it doesn't necessarily mean, oh my goodness, the child alluded to sex, therefore we need to be worried. But coupled with other behaviors and other things that this child was saying, yes, we do need to be worried.
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of hints that you can get from children. But also, we need to be aware that disclosure isn't a one-time event. Very few people, child, adolescent, or adult, will sit down in front of you and say, well, wait till I tell you what happened to me, and start with the first incident and finish at the last. It's much more subtle. It's, the way we say, asking for a friend. Well, sometimes it can be telling for a friend. One of my friends at school said that when they go to bed at night and their elder brother is home from college, that he gets into bed with them and see what the reaction is, and then go, okay, so there's a new piece of knowledge. And now let me go back to that person and say something more about this friend of mine in a week or two, because while the adult to whom the disclosure is being made also needs to process what they're hearing, the child or adolescent who is making the disclosure needs to process how it has landed and also how it feels for them to have finally said those words out loud, or to have alluded to the fact that something may be happening, even if it's in this fictitious person's life, and then go back with something else and another disclosure. Because the other thing is that very often we victims feel that we need to protect the nice people in our lives from our truth, because it's not just that we don't want them to be upset and disgusted with us and how terrible we are as victims. And obviously that's how we think of ourselves when we're still, deep in the abuse situation, but we don't want to upset them. And we've been taught that how we are affect other people and how they feel. So we feel a sense of responsibility, even as children and adolescents.
And just think too, like with teaching girls far more often than boys to be the people pleasers.
Oh, yes.
Victims of sexual assault understand that if they were to disclose a sexual assault to somebody, like, that's not people pleasing. Like, that is potentially like, oh, I have to tell this person, hey, somebody that you care about is hurting me, or has done something to me that I don't like. And they may not want to even say those words out loud, because they know that means you're going to view not only them differently, but also the other people that you care about differently.
And it's going to cause a disruption in your life. And we're taught not to cause that disruption. And I know that my dad will get super angry if I tell him about this thing, because he gets super angry even when I tell him little things. So if I tell him this, I know how mad he's going to get and the fight it's going to cause, and I don't want to be a part of that, and I don't want to be the reason for it.
And that's an excellent point, Amanda. And to continue on that same thing of when you are in a family and you disclose about a family member, you're then worried that the family will be torn apart and it'll be your fault. You'll be blamed for it. And very often that is language that the abuser will use. They'll say, if it's a father or a stepfather, and they say, well, look, you can't tell anybody, because first of all, nobody will believe you. Second of all, they'll all know it's your fault. But even if they do believe you and they think it's my fault, then I'll have to go away, and then mommy will be sad, and there'll be nobody there won't be as much money coming into the house, and you'll all be hungry, and you won't get nice clothes, and you won't be able to go on holiday, and whatever it is that they know will hurt the child or will cause most upset to the child. It's like that is the threat, if you like. If you do this, then bad things will happen and it will be all your fault. So why do children disclose? Well, children, adults, adolescents, anybody discloses because they think that there will be a benefit. And for children, the benefit often is that the abuse will stop, or that they hope it will stop by telling somebody. And it can often be born of a desire to protect younger siblings, because we think, okay, this happened to me, but what if it happens to one of the other kids? Because very often more than one child in a family will be abused, but the children don't know about each other. And what that means is that they then they can't look for solidarity from the other child. Or sometimes I worked with a woman a couple of years ago who had a twin sister, and the abuser, who was their father, would take turns abusing them. And the woman that I worked with, because her sister, unfortunately, is still quite a bit in denial. She refuses to believe that anything happened untoward in the family. So the woman that I was working with, she said that she felt guilty, and still does in her 60s, that she would feel relieved when it was her sister who would be called on a particular night. And she said that to reconcile that with the view that she wants to hold of herself as a good person was very difficult. And I thought, well, why? And she said she also feels that created a wedge between herself and her sister, because she felt they could never really talk openly and honestly about the abuse, because she could never say, there were nights I was glad that it was you and not me. I mean, how do you say that to somebody? That, especially somebody as close as your own twin sister who looks like you, they're identical. So there can be, it's that almost divide and conquer element of things as well. And if you can't say it to the person to whom you're closest, then saying it to anybody else is difficult. But if there is a hope that you can protect another family member or another child, sometimes that is why people will talk about abuse or disclose. And sometimes for girls, it's because they get their periods and they are aware that now they can get pregnant, and their little brains spiral, and they think, oh my goodness, what do I do if I get pregnant with my father's baby or my brother's baby, or how do I make this stop? And for some children, unfortunately, the answer is for them to run away, because they're so worried that nobody will believe them. They're making it up, and they're looking for attention. Oh my goodness me. If somebody's looking for attention, give it to them, and figure out why afterwards, but give them the attention that they're looking for.
You mentioned this a little bit earlier too, and I want to point, not go super far back, but when someone is testing the waters essentially on the disclosure, right? Where it's I have a friend who this is going on with, or let's say this thing would happen, right? What would that be? So they're essentially doing fact finding, right?
Exactly.
We talk about it all the time when it comes to somebody disclosing. That it's very important for the person who's receiving that disclosure to have a good response to it.
Yes.
Even if that person is using those kinds of questions, it's very important you have that good response. And I don't mean good response, but you have 100% of the answers, right? I just mean believing what this person is saying.
Exactly.
Not judging what this person is saying, because they may be testing the waters to build themselves up to be able to say, oh yeah, those questions I was asking, those things were happening to me, and I would like help. If you have a bad response to them doing their fact-finding questions, not only do they now see you as somebody they cannot rely on and trust for help in this situation, but because they trusted you and you had a negative response to them, they are far less likely to ever try to do that with someone else.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Nail on the head there, Sean. 100%. Yes. If you, and we know that as well from research, that children who are believed and who get that support unconditionally when they disclose, and it's not, oh well, what did you do to make it happen, and why didn't you make it stop, that they are far less likely to be traumatized long term. that a child who's able to say to their parents, oh my goodness, I was out playing in the field and such a person came in and said this or did this, and the parent's reaction is, that should never have happened, and we're going to make sure it never happens again. And you've done the right thing by telling me.
When we're talking about, those kids who might be saying like, oh, my friend this, my friend that, those stories that they can come up with, oh, my friend Susie said that they're going to buy a yacht. Well, I think Susie's a liar and that's not going to happen. Okay, so we don't even know Susie and we're just automatically assuming that she's a liar. Well, my friend Susie said that her older sibling, does these things. Well, Susie's probably making some stuff up. Susie's exaggerating. I don't think that's really going on. If you're not going to believe this story that I'm telling you about someone you don't even know, why would you believe me?
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, exactly. That yacht story very much could be testing the waters, all the puns intended. But absolutely. So I suppose that the response then when we hear something, rather than dismissing it out of hand, is going, wow, that's interesting. How does Susie even know what a yacht is? That's pretty cool. Where is she going to go to get this yacht? Have you asked her? Do you think she'd tell you? Would she let you have a go on her yacht? Is it a toy yacht or a real yacht? And invest in the story in terms of just asking more questions instead of, as you've said, Amanda, dismissing it out of hand. So then it is, at least the kid, you might both come to the conclusion that Susie might kind of be sort of making things up. Maybe what Susie means is that her parents are planning on going on a cruise to Alaska next summer and she wishes she was going with them. That might be the root of it, but we'll ask questions till we get to the bottom of it. I
do this regularly. I'll do it with my son right now. My son's only like 18 months old, so like not talking or anything like that. But he'll do stuff, and I was like, I'm just gonna commit to the bit. Like I've decided like that's my role. Like I will commit to a bit. I've never had a problem with committing to the bit anyway. But it's like he'll pick something up and look at me and put it on the ground really hard. I'm like, you're so right. That does belong on the ground. And then he'll do it again over and over again. So I'm like, I'm just going to let him do his thing. And like whatever he's like doing to me and saying, like, I'm going with it. So like if my son comes home and is like, hey, my buddy says he's getting a yacht. I was like, that's cool. Can we go on the yacht?
Exactly.
Like, I got my swimsuit ready.
Exactly.
Like it's like just commit to the bit. Like kids are kids. Like you committing to a bit, it might be funny to them in like that sense, but like if you're willing to like go along with what these kids are saying, they're gonna say more things to you.
You raise a really good point there, Sean, because as adults we're taught that that nonsense, we don't buy into nonsense, and we're having none of this silliness business, whereas in actual fact we should be doing more of that even as adults in our everyday lives. Play is essential, and engaging in silliness is so good for us. Oh really, there was a dinosaur in your school today? Oh yeah, you've no idea. No, I have no idea. What color was it? Oh, it was purple. Oh really? What was it called? And it is, and it's fun, and it's exciting, and it is, like you say, commit to the biff. That's a brilliant phrase. I'm stealing that one. But also
gladly, go for it.
Thank you. As well as the stories that children tell us, sometimes the stories that they hear or that they read, and not so much for the lilies, but for teens and tweens and our adolescents, when they consume media that has sexual violence or sexual assault as a theme, even if it's not the main theme, it can help them with disclosure as well, because they're reading a book or they're watching something on Netflix or whatever streaming service they prefer. Other streaming services exist, that they are going, oh, okay, so this is a thing. This thing is happening to me, happens to other people, so I'm not a freak, and it's not just my, it's not just in my world. And it's not my fault because I'm seeing how the reaction is in the movies or in whatever I'm watching or whatever book I'm reading. And now I have the language as well. I know what to call the thing. It's not he's doing something I don't like. Oh, what's that now? Breathing. Because I think any of us with siblings have often just had a problem with the fact that our siblings are breathing too loud or breathing in the wrong direction. So to be able to say something more than they're doing something I don't like, to be able to say, look, they're coming into my room at night and they're not supposed to be, and they're touching me and I don't like it, and to know that they don't have to put up with it can help lead to disclosure as well, to a safe adult. And we're assuming, of course, that there are safe adults, and not everybody does have a safe adult.
I love talking about media, so I'm gonna not jump on my soapbox and get us super far off on a tangent here. But it is why I say it's super important that if you're going to have domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking in media, which you absolutely should, you have to make sure that you're doing it the right way.
Bingo.
Because if you do it in the incorrect way, all you're doing is potentially perpetrating myths and stereotypes or biases or anything that we believe about rape or sexual assault, or which is already incorrect. But you're then also making sure that you're silencing victims. Because they're going to see that and be like, oh, I guess that's not me. So that's not it. Or if it's the Sansa Stark issue. If you have a character that is sexually assaulted and then she says that it's because of them I'm as strong as I am now. So thanking them for it. And I was like, that's how you do it wrong.
Yep, that's how you do it wrong.
And when you do it wrong, you're harming people, and I don't like when it's done wrong. I believe it needs to be in media, but you have to do it right.
Yes.
The boys, for as much as you may have issues with the boys just based on the content of the stuff, they do sexual assault very well, in terms of how they tell that story.
Okay, I'm not familiar with them or their content at all. So
The Boys is great. It's a really quick sidebar. It is a show about superheroes if they weren't all great. Essentially, they're run by a corporation, so the superheroes that lead them, which is their Justice League analogy of the Seven, they're all not super great people. And on the first day of one of our main characters, Starlight, her first day, she is sexually assaulted by one of the members of the Seven as her initiation into the Seven. You then throughout the course of the first season see her processing that sexual assault, having gone into a job that she's wanted since she was a child, or was told she wanted since she was a child, to then have that be taken away from her on the very first day by somebody there, to then trying to disclose that to the other woman on the team who just dismisses her because she's gone through the same thing, so she's just rolling through the punches at this point, to then where she eventually culminates in disclosing to a love interest, because he listens to her, has a good response, and she then discloses to the world what she experienced. So it's one season. So again, it's really fast for what the processing of this would be, but you show the steps at least.
Exactly. And it's very interesting what you said there, that she discloses to a love interest, because with adolescents, we find that is oftentimes the first person they disclose to is the first person that they are seriously romantically involved with. It's an attempt to get closer to the person that they're in a relationship with, and it's sometimes to explain their reluctance to be intimate, or their difficulties around sexual intimacy. And sometimes I've come across two women immediately spring to mind that I've worked with in the past 2 years, who had no picture memories themselves of their own abuse, but their then boyfriends, for one of them, her now husband, asked the question, said, look, I really hope you don't mind me asking this, but did your father ever abuse you? Is there any chance that he might have abused you? And I remember hearing this story and thinking how brave those young men were to broach that subject and to have the awareness and to say, I may well get a kick in the scrotum myself for even asking the question, because what had clued these young men in was that the way that the women were, or their girlfriends were around their fathers. There was an absolute idolization of their dads that these guys, these young men just weren't comfortable with. They said, that's not usual. Like there's something funny about that. And just how the girl's body language would change when they were in the home, in the family home, and the father came in, and the women, now women, then girls, weren't even able to see that for themselves. They had no idea how their body language changed, and it was actually their boyfriends who picked up on it. And again, for both of these women, it was only when their fathers died that their memories came flooding back. And for one of them, she was Irish family, 6 sisters. So it was when one of her other sisters said, after Daddy had died, she said, you do know, like, and it wasn't long after, it was like maybe a fortnight after the funeral. And she said, well, I'm glad he's dead because, you know, he abused me for most of my life. And each of the other girls had also been abused, except, well, one is in very much deep in denial. She said, no, it wasn't just that. That was just how he showed his affection. So she's just not in a position, or she wasn't then, to deal with it. But each of the other sisters thought that they were the only one, and that by them being abused, they were somehow protecting their other sisters. And that's just a very stark example of what we were saying earlier about how abusers just manipulate and separate the sisters and or the children they're abusing. And what really struck me about the woman with the 6 sisters, she said the girl her sister who disclosed just after the funeral, when they were then talking about it amongst themselves, she said, Daddy only stopped when I cried. That there was one occasion when her father was molesting her, and it had progressed to rape, and he was about to rape her again, and she started to cry because she had a boyfriend that she was very interested in. She wanted to again, not even, she wasn't even thinking necessarily of having a sexual relationship with him, but she wanted to be considered wife material. And again, this is Holy Catholic Ireland, and it was probably about 30 years ago when the abuse was happening, and she thought that she couldn't be if she wasn't a virgin. And, you know, all these thoughts in her head, and that's what eventually made her cry. All the years that she'd been abused, the only thing that made her cry was the thought that she wouldn't be, quote unquote, good enough for the man that she wanted to marry. And it was only when he saw the tears that her father stopped, because it suddenly kind of, he'd broken her or something, or he suddenly realized how that this child anyway felt that there was something wrong with what he was doing, and he was almost confronted by his own culpability. But it didn't stop him abusing the other sisters. He just left her alone. Yeah. So,
and this also, I guess, this part of that also sounds like the like overarching discussions that we've had of how society will often be putting put certain things on women that aren't placed on men, so that it's like the reason that she was crying wasn't because she was being abused. It was because she was worried now the person that she was interested in would no longer see her as worthy of being
a wife
with her.
Yeah.
And when we as a society, regardless, over in the UK, over in Europe, over in the United States, our society often puts a lot of things on women that, if we were to like actually start to peel back the mask a little bit on those things, it really shows that those things have been put in place to make women more subservient, remain to be quiet, don't talk about things that are deemed taboo or bad.
Mm-hmm.
So we have no problem when men talk about sex. So what we end up doing is making a majority of victims, because again, a majority of victims identify as being women. A majority of victims are not going to be willing to speak out because I've never been given the language to do so.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to speak out because it's going to deem them as being problematic. They're not going to speak out because, depending on their religious upbringing, they may view themselves as no longer being worth anything.
Mm-hmm.
And all that does is create a society that works to support and help perpetrators of sexual assault.
That's exactly it. We could sum it up in one word, couldn't we? It's the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we also need to recognize that a lot of women are complicit with this. I've heard from and spoken with women who are convinced that their mothers knew that they were being sexually abused by their own fathers, and did nothing about it for a variety of reasons or excuses, if you want to put it that way. But that there is no question in these women's minds that their mothers knew and they didn't do anything. And that can sometimes come back to the fact that the mothers felt that if they did anything about it, that they would have nowhere to go with their children, that they would not be able to financially support the family. So it was a kind of almost a decision on the mother's part to, quote unquote, sacrifice one child so that the rest would be safe. Even if they didn't use that language in their own heads, it was good. Well, this is better than the alternative. And also, we tell ourselves, and this is one of my least favorite words in the world, that children are resilient and they will get over it and they will be fine. And until quite recently, and I say that by quite recently, I mean within the past 20, 25 years, people believed that whatever happened to a child before they were 3 or 4, they wouldn't remember, so it wouldn't affect them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, we now know that is not true, that bodies remember. But because our bodies remember, bodies also disclose. And it is looking for things like the child who repeatedly has a UTI, or the child who repeatedly, as I said, is touching themselves and inappropriately or at inappropriate times. And these are the ways that bodies can shed disclosure. Or the child who's too tired, who's more tired than you would expect them to be. And it's not because, and you say, well, what time did you go to bed at last night? 7 o'clock. Well, how can you be so tired? Because, I went to bed at 7. But it was, I was woken up again at 9, and then it was midnight before I could get back to sleep, because by the time the abuser had finished abusing me, and then I had finished having a cry for myself, and then I had gone back to sleep, or I keep waking up every 20 minutes because I'm afraid that somebody's going to come in. So it is things like that the child who you think they really shouldn't be this tired all the time, that could be something else where the body is disclosing. And sometimes the child doesn't even remember, because we've spoken about that as well, how our brains work to protect us by shielding us from our own reality sometimes.
Yeah. So Hazel, we are currently at our hour mark. So to be respectful of your time, we're going to work on this, kind of wrapping this up really quick.
Let's do that.
So before we let you go though, if you were to give our audience one nugget that they were going to want, that you would want them to take away from this, what would that be?
That disclosure happens, and it happens even when we're not looking for it. And even children who don't have language to put on what is happening to them, their bodies are dripping disclosure on an almost daily basis. And that we as adults need to stop shying away from difficult subjects.
It's when we have the touchy subjects, it's remaining in silence around them only furthers not only the harm that is being done to people, but further continues to support and protect those of us who are doing harm.
Yeah.
So Hazel, if you wanted to follow you on social media, and check out your book in the future, where would they be able to do those things?
Oh, well, there are links to everywhere you can find me on my website, which is www.traumarecovery.ie.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I have a link to that in the show notes, as well as links to your socials directly for people.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for joining us today, Hazel.
I really enjoyed it. I can't believe that hour flew. So
yes.
Thank you both for your time.
Yes. No, thank you so much for being able to join us. We appreciate having you on.
Anytime.
And perfect. We'll start looking at that part 2. So listeners, be ready to check out the part 2 when we get it. But thank you again, Hazel, and thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at TouchySubsPod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and other content coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubspod@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really helps the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.